I want to put in a plug for something other than the outdoors. And it's not that I don't like the outdoors. I think it has all the power we've been attributing to it.
I definitely appreciate that plug.
Okay. Deeply enough, and a teacher, an instructor, who understood the experiential power of literature if you get into it deeply enough and in the right spirit. So it doesn't necessarily have to be the outdoors to do that.
Yeah.
And one of the things I've always hoped, and that's a kind of a low point for me, was to be able to bring into under the umbrella of experiential education the idea that preparing and performing a play, mask work, ritual and dramatic work and craft work have got potentials for.
But it goes along with what Keith talks about. What we're really talking about is just good teaching.
In a sense, yeah.
Yeah.
That to me, there's a truth there, but it's also somewhat dismissive, and I don't want to lose the power of the
Yeah.
stuff. Another low point for me was the loss of our service learning program.
Yeah.
We as a teacher education institution, we had a community service component built into the program. To use the dirty word, it was compulsory.
Mm-hmm.
It was part of the expectation. The people that were going to serve young human beings as teachers should practice that.
Well, and if you
during
can
their
require people
training.
to write a paper, why can't you require that?
Precisely.
Right.
So we didn't make apologies, although as the program was eroded and attacked, one of the grounds for attacking it was that it was compulsion, which people ought not to be compelled to go and help others.
Yeah.
I'm putting it badly, but I'm putting them in the worst possible light.
But that is the argument that's been out there a lot of places.
Right.
Yeah.
And the end result was that those of us who favored this program were ultimately, in the end, defeated. It doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
And that's got to be a defeat, and it's got to be a low point. And I wish we had an Alec Dixon that we could have called on to come and help us.
Yeah.
Because we weren't able to persuade the powers that be to sustain that thing.
Yeah. Final question is, what would you say to people coming into the field now?
I'd encourage a person coming into the field to pay attention to the question of what they take as being an authority. There's the authority of the tradition. And I think that a person, that a good experiential educator knows the tradition and knows what's the heart and soul of that tradition and what are the barnacles that have been kind of added onto it that grow onto any long-standing tradition. And this is in many ways is a very ancient tradition. If you think of craft guilds, for example,
Oh, yeah.
and how a novice learned whether to be a stonemason or a silversmith or a fisherman. There was experiential learning there. So there's a long tradition of that. But that ought not to be the ultimate authority. The ultimate authority ought to be your present experience in the here and now. And being guided by that without being bound, as Bob has said, without being bound by excessive rules, restrictions, certification expectations, and those kinds of things have become, in some respects, restricting and barriers to creativity. I'd encourage the young incomer to look at their students, the young people or old people, clients, whoever they're going to be working with, and take their reading on them in the here and now and ask, how can those people contribute to their own education, and how can I help doing that? Bearing in mind the tradition, but not being in some kind of sense, in some way, obliged to follow it. In other words, it's really, I'd encourage a person to break their own trail rather than follow the well-beaten path that's been laid down. And that leads me to a thing that, since you've given me the opportunity, and you can edit it out if you don't like it.
I always have that option, yeah, but I don't actually.
And that is, there is a language which has appeared in the Association for Experiential Education that goes back to the maybe late 80s, certainly it was present then, and that is speaking of the educational enterprise as an industry. Mm-hmm. And I see education as a common good. It has to do with the kinds of things like making people grow and develop to their full potential, the exercise of freedom and responsibility. I think that the combination of personal liberty and care for others is sort of the ultimate expression of humanity, and we need to nurture that in every way. To me, that can't be industrialized. It doesn't fit on what I think it means to be an industry. So we're not like the chemical industry or the automotive industry. The outdoor education industry is not, to me, doesn't fit the ideals of education. Yeah. I understand that it's necessary for people to make a living, and I've really been lucky because I've been a public servant, and I've been paid more or less well. And sometimes it's been necessary to coerce the ratepayers to collect the taxes to pay my salary, but I haven't had to freelance as some people do, and I respect that's a different way of going about it. But still, I guess I'm cautioning that the human values that inhere in what I think experiential education is are not compatible with an industrial model.
I share that concern.
I don't know that it's as strong as it used to be, but it's still there in the field. And for incomers, I think giving them a word of caution about that is maybe not. It's maybe appropriate for an elder in the association to do that.
It's very much there in certain aspects of the field, I would say, and in others not quite as much.
For our students in the program at Queen's University, we soon recognized that people needed to have a discipline.
Yes.
And it didn't matter whether you had someone with a master's degree in music or whether you had someone with a BA, PhD, as long as they were well disciplined, then they could make a contribution.
The discipline is what's important. I really think that's true. Because once you master that, then you can move into the other aspects, and you can begin to use the metaphors, and you can make those connections. But without that, you can't.
Yeah, it's hard for outsiders to understand, and we didn't know this ahead of time. We learned it experientially.
Yeah.
That as long as people had a good grounding in something, then they would find ways and means to construct, as you say, metaphors or other things that would work.
And maybe it has to do again with the idea that they are ready to be a really good teacher at that point, and can generalize that process more.
Sure.